Welcome to the Baseball Corner with Austin Oerman.
Payoff pitch. Hot drive. Deep left. Grand slam. Bobby Witt Jr. wins it. Sensational.
The Nick Sehnert.
Here's the 0-1. This is going to be a tough play. The Cubs win the World Series. Brian makes the play. It's over. And the Cubs have finally won it all.
On 93.7 The Ticket and theticketfm.com. Keep an eye on the ball as they go around the horn from local prep baseball to college baseball and even the minor and major leagues. Now, here are your hosts, Nick Sehnert and Austin Oerman.
That's right. Welcome in another edition of the Baseball Corner here on 93.7 The Ticket and theticketfm.com. Coming to you live Monday nights at 6 p.m. on the radio dial. We are also on stream, as always, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, up and running for you, as is our channel 961. I'm Austin Oerman, joined as always by Nick Sehnert. Nick, happy Monday night. Great to talk some ball with you again.
Absolutely is. Week 2 of the show. And I know we have a lot of takes, a lot of thoughts on just stuff that happened this past week, so I'm ready to dive into it.
Let's do it. Let's start with the Huskers. We made our predictions toward the end of last week's show on what the week would look like. You were hoping for an undefeated week. Didn't quite work out that way for the Huskers. I was hoping for 3-1, but I settled on 2-2, and unfortunately, I was correct. Starting with that Creighton game, Nick, where Nebraska, it was the tale of really two halves, right, when you think about it. Nebraska goes down, 6-0, I think it was officially, to Creighton. They crawl back to 6-4. Creighton puts up a couple insurance runs. Nebraska gets 3 in the 9th, but isn't able to come back and complete the comeback victory over Creighton. Ed Service goes out of the Nebraska-Creighton series a winner. Really, I think that Creighton game just distilled a lot of what this season has been about, right? Offense isn't good. Early, defensive miscues, things just add up. But you can never quit. You can't quit the Huskers. You can't count them out. They did a commendable job coming back, but ultimately it falls just short.
Yeah, and it's really frustrating because you look at what Nebraska had to use in this game, and it looked like it was almost like Nebraska was trying to beat Creighton at their own game. It felt like for a second, to where you Johnny Holstaff type of approach, which we knew what going in that Will Walsh probably wasn't going to have the longevity that maybe we would see them have in terms of length of leash on a Friday night, right? As we see Nebraska's staff try to shift Will Walsh into a different role. 50 games into the season, shift Will Walsh into a different role. And not that any of Nebraska's pitchers are truly, from a longevity standpoint, somebody that you feel great about consistently being able to give you 6 or 7 innings. Will Walsh went out, started out pretty well from the mound. Then I think he finishes, 2 2/3 of an inning. And you look when it's all said and done at Nebraska's pitchers on Tuesday against Creighton, and they used 9 of them. They used 9 arms. Now, some of that, it's important to note, some of that is strategy, right? Some of that is bringing in a guy. We saw it over the weekend, Luke Broderick on Friday. Brought him in for an out just to close that. It was certain other guys that brought him in. Casey Dice is in this role a lot, where they'll bring guys in for just an out and try to get out of an inning and then go to somebody new at the start of a new inning. Some of it was strategy. Some of it, guys just weren't able to throw strikes and compete.
That was pretty much the tale, right? I mean, Blackowitz goes 2/3 of an innings after Will Walsh. Colin Novacek doesn't even record an out. He gets tagged for 2 runs, one of them earned. Harrahill throws an inning in a third. Clark, Dice, Clevenger, Christo, Bender, and Christo gave up those 2 big runs late in that game. And I know we'll get to him here in just a little bit. But Nick, from Creighton to the games that Nebraska really had to win to improve its seeding and chances at the Big Ten tournament. Friday night against Michigan, certainly not a thing of beauty, a 3-2 win for Nebraska. I know you're a defense and pitching guy, so I don't want to insult that by any stretch of the imagination. But despite only scoring 3 runs, Nick, I was pretty impressed with the offense, making Michigan ace Kurt Barr throw 107 pitches in just 6 innings, and the Huskers drew 5 walks, right? Even though the runs weren't put up on the board, I thought Nebraska's offensive process was pretty darn solid.
Yeah, for the majority of the lineup, I thought so too. There were certain guys that had multiple strikeouts. I think Nebraska, we're talking about a lot of the statistics here, Austin, that you have to dive deeper into the box score and the stat sheet to really recognize like the pitch count and things like that. Those won't pop off the page unless that's something that you're kind of specifically looking for. One thing that I always pay attention to is the strikeout and walk numbers offensively for Nebraska. Nebraska as a team struck out 8 times on Friday night, and there were a couple of guys that struck out multiple times. I think Dylan Carey, DC, went 0 for 3 that day. He had a little bit of a tougher weekend, but at least at the plate he did. He struck out 3 times against Michigan on Friday night. So you take away, 2 of those and say, okay, well, it wasn't 8 separate guys striking out once. It was a couple of guys doing it a couple of times throughout the course of the game. I still struggle with wondering what their approach is at the plate. I think that's been kind of the biggest question mark for me this entire year, because there were multiple times, and I was at the ballpark over the weekend, there were multiple times where Nebraska would get into advantageous accounts, and they would watch a low 90s, and I say low 90s because now in this day and age of college baseball, that's pretty hittable, right? And you expect one of your 9 guys in the lineup to be able to hit that. They were in advantageous accounts, but they weren't looking to do anything with it once they got there. Now, Saturday was better, but specifically there were some days, and throughout the course of the season, I try to segment it and look at it like chapter by chapter. But it's sometimes difficult too when losses string together and you are, 1 game under 500 in conference play. You wonder, okay, what could we have done differently as a team throughout the rest of the season to change this outcome? And I think approach at the plate could have been a lot better this entire season. But like you said, they were fine on Friday. They were fine, and they got the job done. 3 runs. Most of the time with this pitching staff, it wouldn't give you that much confidence, but it did on Friday. It worked out.
When you think of the guys that do have an approach that you've seen consistently throughout the year, does anyone come to mind for you?
I will actually say this. I think Dylan Carey's doing a really good job. I think DC, and then I also think Caden Brumbaugh, which the numbers will show that Caden Brumbaugh is leading the team in batting average and is high up there in hits and things like that. I think there's a difference between the approach at the plate and being lackadaisical, but then I think there's also you don't want to be too jumpy and expand the strike zone, because Nebraska's strikeout numbers would tell you that a lot of the time Nebraska's on that jumpier side of things. Like I think of a guy like Josh Overbeek. I think of Dylan Carey last year, where they would expand the strike zone. Pitchers would not have to necessarily be that competitive, and they would go down swinging, or they'd be fishing for something. I think, Austin, like we can dive deep into this of like, if you're forcing extended ABs and you are forcing the pitcher to actually come to the strike zone consistently in a ball game, which they were for the most part on Friday, that's how you can get the guy's numbers up to 101 pitches on the evening. And that's how you can win 3-2 ball games, is because out of the 101 pitches, you need him to miss on one of them. You need him to try to come in, go right down middle, doesn't have a whole lot of velocity on it. Maybe you have to wait till the later innings, but you have to jump on it and be ready to jump on it when it comes.
When I think of approach, one part of it is, do I see a hitter that knows who they are?
Yeah.
What they're trying to accomplish. That's what the approach is. It's what pitch am I looking for, and then knowing what to do with it. Tyler Stone's approach holistically, I'm not sure about, but he knows who he is, at the very least, as a hitter. I think about what you're saying with the patience, right? Case Anderson, I think, has had a pretty good approach and process. He knows who he is. The power hasn't maybe developed like we thought it could coming into the year, but we'll get back to him in just a second with some heroics there. Devin Nunez is striking out a bunch, even though he has a pretty high average for what playing time he has. But then you think about a guy like Robbie Bolton. Does he know who he is as a D1 hitter yet? I don't think so. Riley Silva, I mean, maybe, right? I mean, he's only struck out 11 times and drawn 11 walks as well. But is his approach beneficial to Nebraska? It's had its moments here and there. I still just think this is a team that's searching for who it is and who it wants to be on an individual basis. And certainly that plays out, I think, on the team level when you have 2, 3, maybe 4 guys you can point to as hitters who know who they are, who know what they're about.
Yeah.
It explains a lot of the ups and downs for this offense all year.
You're right. And I think there's two ways you can look at this. It's like holistic team identity, but then individual, like you talked about. And I think Nebraska is searching holistically as well. I think that there are certain guys on the roster that feel like they can change the game with one swing of a bat, but they don't do it consistently enough to where they can dive into that full 100%, if that makes sense. I think like,
well, it's same in basketball, right? A guy that thinks he can go one-on-one, play iso ball, and it just doesn't work at scale. It doesn't work when you play it out. I mean, maybe it will for a game, but it might not work for more than a weekend or a month at a time.
And that's where you can't get, and I think it's that's where this staff's responsibility and job. You can't allow them to get fooled by it working for a weekend. I think that the greatest example is a Gabe Swanson. Like I think that is the most prime example, because we started to see Gabe catch a little bit of fire like we have in years past towards, the end of April and the start of May. And it's easy in a game of failure to look at each success, look at each small success and say, okay, I found it. This is what I've been missing, or this is what I've done differently. So this is what's working. We know this. Baseball is so much a game of process and trusting the process. And it becomes like a lot of sports and pieces of football and basketball you can compare it to. The act of being monotonous and tedious day after day. And you can go 0 for 3 with 3 Ks. You can go 0 for 4 the next day with 4 lineouts, hitting the ball over exit velocity of 105 miles an hour. You can do that, but you have to be able to show up to the ballpark the next day and do the same exact thing and essentially trust the process. That's why I think off-season in baseball is as important as an off-season as it is in any sport, because you could be doing stuff absolutely perfect from a fundamental, a technique standpoint one day and still fail 4 times. But you have to be willing and able to not only physically, but mentally flush that and get ready for the next day and do the same thing over the next day, and just not necessarily hope and pray, but trust in that your training is going to, bring a positive outcome. Now, conversely, is on a day where you could go 4 for 4 with 2 home runs, a double, and a triple, you have to understand that the next day, just because you did that on Friday doesn't mean you're doing that on Saturday. And so it's, once again, it's that flushing of flush the success and go back to a process-driven approach. And that's where I think Nebraska sometimes struggles at times, is you'll have guys that will have a really strong weekend, but they can't consistently carry it over to the next weekend and to the next weekend. And I think back to the 40-win seasons. I think back, sure, you're going to have diamonds in the roughs and you're going to have flashes in the pan, but you think back to last year, who was consistent towards the top middle part of your order? Josh Caron. Not necessarily with the long ball, not how he was doing it, but the approach and what he was doing.
He knew who he was as a hitter.
Yes. And he didn't try to do too much, because the process will eventually reward you if you're approaching it the correct way.
That's where this Nebraska team, Nick, I don't know how much they still mentally are riding the coattails of last year. Oh, we're going to turn it on.
Yeah.
Oh, we have guys who've been here, done this before. We're just going to rely on experience and we'll be fine. There are some legitimately good hitters on this team, right? I feel confident in saying that. But there are no hitters on this team who should be that confident to just assume that one weekend is going to carry over to the next without having put in their requisite reps, whether it's in the offseason, during practice, during the week, whatever it is. The best hitters in baseball, college baseball, maybe there's a couple of them, maybe a handful at the major league level. When you're locked in. When your swing feels so right. Everything is in tune. Everything is on time. It feels perfect. I don't know how many of those guys Nebraska has on this team. And I don't think every guy in this team should be tinkering with their swing.
Yeah.
But I don't know how many guys recently over the last, let's just say, 2-3 weeks have had a full weekend where they're like, yes, my swing was locked in. My timing was there. Yeah. My approach was good. My eye was good. And since that's the case, you can't afford to rest on anything. When you're fighting for a Big Ten tournament spot, when you're fighting yourself, right? Fighting those inner battles just to stay locked in week and day at a time. Pitch at a time really is what it has to come down to for Nebraska. That's, Nick, where I think something that Evan Bland said last week stuck with me as we keep talking about the last week that was for Husker baseball. Creighton views the midweeks more as a sprint. Nebraska views it as a season-long marathon. There's no one right way or wrong way to do it, but I think this is another way where Will Bolt's marathon view process is important. Yes, absolutely. But it might have to be viewed as a sprint too, right? Yeah. This pitch, I have to put everything I have into this pitch. And sometimes that means you take a pitch. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that means you just spit on a pitch. Sometimes it means you foul it off. But it feels like sometimes Nebraska is treating these games as a marathon. Yeah. And then you see the sprint lock in late in games when they make these comebacks. I don't know how seriously everyone on Nebraska is taking every pitch.
That's an interesting thought, because I'm trying to sit here and think, are we becoming too lackadaisical with midweeks? And that's
last
where
couple of years would tell you, yeah.
I think so. And by we, I mean like even
Husker
us
fans,
even us as like talking about it. Mm-hmm. Are we taking them because it doesn't count towards your record?
It doesn't count toward the conference record. Just count toward the RPI.
No. And so I'm wondering, as I sit here and like have the wheels turn in my head, I'm wondering if we're too lackadaisical about, okay, look, it would have been nice to beat Creighton. It would have been nice to beat North Dakota State on this Tuesday night, this blustery Tuesday in March. It would have been nice, but at least it doesn't affect our conference record, or it doesn't affect the weekend series. Maybe that's where we need to have higher expectations. I also struggle with knowing what expectations should we have, because I'm a big proponent of Will Bolt said this, so this is what we need to hold him to. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's a conversation for another time, but I just there's so much. It doesn't feel like Nebraska baseball and Nebraska baseball fans are on the same page. And in such a process-driven and process-oriented sport, mm-hmm. I think there are silver linings, and I have to be careful because I don't want to sit here and say that there's a quality loss. But I think that in football, basketball, baseball, especially baseball, you can take pieces from the losses, though. Mm-hmm. And from an individual standpoint, you could there would be one thing if we're able to look at Will Walsh after Tuesday against Creighton and say, yeah, you know what? In crucial situations, Will has shown us maybe the longevity's not there, mm-hmm. but the command has been there consistently. The ability to just get guys out has been there consistently.
He's throwing competitive pitches every time.
Right. And then from a lineup standpoint, you have to look deeper than just the result. Mm-hmm. Okay, he hit it 105 off the bat, but it was right at the center fielder. Okay, on the box score, it's going to show up 0 for 1. But in reality, if you're going to hit a ball 105 off the bat, you're feeling good about your chances of getting a couple of those down. Mm-hmm. Nebraska, unfortunately, doesn't have that, though, because we saw it in the first half of the year with the way that the staff orchestrated the lineup. It was different every time.
Yeah.
It was different every time. So whether that's a blend of the staff not knowing and not being able to really have a pulse or get a pulse on what their team does well, who is swinging it well, those deeper than the box score kind of details, or whether it's just the guys in the locker room that aren't able to do it either. There's just been, once again, just inconsistency after inconsistency. And I think the blame needs to go on everybody on that roster, player and coach, because you could make a case against both.
Baseball is such an incredibly team-oriented sport, but at some point it is on the individual. So to take that accountability for themselves and just say, you know what, I'm going to be the one to have a good at bat, right? It starts at the top of the lineup in the first inning, right? Set the tone. Have a good at bat your first time up, right? That goes a long way. If you're the middle of the order and the top of the order did its job, do your job. Then if you're the bottom of the order, just because you're hitting 7, 8, 9 doesn't mean you're a free at bat.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you roll over and say, oh, I'm at the bottom of the order. They don't expect anything from me. So you know what? We'll just get through this inning and turn it over to the top. I don't want to say, Nick, that Nebraska is not competitive, or that Nebraska doesn't care. But I think you hit on something, does Nebraska need to change its approach in the midweek? I think so. Right. Now, that doesn't mean, you go chase every out. Because again, I think Nebraska cares. I think Nebraska is doing its best and is competitive, and upgraded talent level would certainly go a long way in this. But whether I don't know, these guys are making an NIL, regardless, you step between the lines, there's a standard that you have to play to. You should do everything in your power as a player and a coach to win the game in front of you. Right now, that doesn't mean, push your midweek guy to 5 innings when he is only capable of giving you 3 because you want to save games for the weekend. That also doesn't mean you have to throw 9 guys every time, get the best inning possible out of every guy. We're not trying to say Nebraska needs to go undefeated all the time. But some of the lineup decisions, the lack of approach, that's okay if you're still struggling to find yourself, especially as a Midwestern team in the first 2-3 weeks of the year.
Yeah.
Maybe, hopefully, you've stolen a win like Nebraska did against Vanderbilt. No one really even say steal, right? Nebraska absolutely earned that win over Vanderbilt. But pick off a win or two that really helps your RPI when you get down to this time of the year.
Oregon State series,
absolutely. But Nick, have you seen the same competitive fire from the Oregon State series all year from Nebraska? Well, I wouldn't say so.
No, I don't think so. And that's what's unfortunate, because there's a difference between us saying that they need to throw competitive pitches and them being competitive.
Yeah.
It's 2 separate conversations. So on the conversation about competitiveness as a team, you have to figure out a way, and this is where it's monotonous and tedious. You have to figure out a way to get up with the same energy on March 27th when you're playing Oregon State that you do on May 9th, getting ready for Michigan. And you cannot get emotional just because of the name on the other chest. I think that ultimately Nebraska baseball is in such a weird spot to where they have talent on their roster. I think it's just so much of it is we look around being a Midwestern team, and Austin, you and I are both younger, so we understand maybe a little bit more of how these guys are thinking. College baseball is changing dramatically, and it has changed dramatically. And you see guys at the college level like Cags and like other players, and you sit there and go, okay, I want to do that. And we get it goes back to what you said about being what you're like, figuring out what you're best at, figure out what your role needs to be. Because I sit there and I go, Nebraska, I would imagine so badly would love to be a team that mashes the ball, that can hit home runs, that can just abuse opponents starting pitching. But in reality, that's not who they are. And in reality, I don't think that's how Will Bolt should build a program. And so we get so infatuated with this dude hit a ball 105 off the bat and hit it with a launch angle of 32 degrees or 24 degrees, and that ball would have been gone in 32 MLB stadiums. But for a team like Nebraska, it needs to be so process oriented. And when Nebraska, I think back to like 2021 and what they did so well. And it was like you had a Joe Acker and you had a Mojo Hagee and you had a Jackson Hallmark and you had Aaron Polinsky wasn't on that team, I don't think. But it was the situation.
Polinsky was there. He left for the next year.
That's right. He left the next year. But it's like you didn't see Jackson Hallmark trying to hit a home run. And I think at times there's guys on this team that think that they are Jack Caglianone when they need to be more of a Jackson Hallmark.
Absolutely. I think that's the way that Nebraska needs to build, is a bunch of gap-to-gap doubles guys, a table setter or two, and then you need a big bopper bat in the middle of your lineup, right? I mean, Polinsky did hit for a fair amount of power that year, but he wasn't chasing it. He wasn't searching for it. It was just natural, which I think goes back to what we were saying about upgrading the talent level. But I think you can make what talent you do have play up when you know what your identity is. When guys have an idea of who they are, what they need to do. A team that needs to string hits together to score runs is always going to be hot and cold. And that's what Nebraska is. But that gets amplified when you have a bunch of guys who can hit the ball over the wall, but it's not their calling card, when they go out and they search the long ball, when they go chase for it, when they're only sitting on, one pitch, which on one hand can be healthy, but sometimes you don't see that pitch. So if you don't get that fastball in your wheelhouse, can you flick the breaking ball the other way and keep the line moving? We haven't seen Nebraska show that consistency and dedication to keeping the line moving long enough, all year really for this team, Nick.
But that's also like one of Nebraska's biggest issues is number one, and this is once again the deeper than the box score kind of thing. Nebraska as a team this year has 54 home runs. It's not great.
In 51 games?
In 51 games. And the casualists might sit there and say, oh, well, that's good. That's over one a game. That's not bad at all. But number one is you've allowed 62 against a fine schedule. But you have 54 home runs in over 1,700 team at bats.
Woo.
You have 470 hits in over 1,700 at bats. Your team batting average is slightly above 270. So I'm fine with that home run number being around that 50 mark. If as a team you're hitting 290, if as a team you're hitting closer to 300, like this is something maybe we can talk about in the next segment of when you look at Nebraska, you have so many guys that have, a substantial number of at-bats. You have guys that have started every single game, all 50 games. You have guys that have started 46 of them or 41 of them or 51 of them. And it's like, okay, what do they need to do differently as the postseason creeps on? The slugging percentage as a team is not great. The batting average as a team is not great. The walk numbers are fine. But if you want to know how Nebraska fares at seeing the baseball, they have 187 walks on the year offensively. They've given up 212.
Yeah.
That should tell you everything about, number one, discipline, but then also how this pitching staff factors in as well.
I think that's a great place to take our first break of the show. When we get back for the second inning, we'll dive into what Nick just said up there. He's Nick. I'm Austin. This is the Baseball Corner on the Ticket.
You're listening to Baseball Corner with Nick Sehnert and Austin Oerman on 93.7 The Ticket. Now's the time to grab your snacks. The second inning is next.
Take control of your health with the DASH scan at Advanced Medical Imaging. The DASH scan is a full-body MRI designed for advanced health screening. This dynamic approach provides exceptionally sharp images across multiple organ systems, helping to detect potential concerns early. With minimal radiation and no invasive procedures, the DASH scan offers a safe, comprehensive look at your health. Plus, results are delivered faster than ever, giving both patients and physicians confidence in screening and diagnosis. Your health is too important to wait. Schedule your DASH scan today at Advanced Medical Imaging. Visit amimaging.com or call 402-484-6677 to learn more.
Select Plumbing and Utility has been serving Lincoln and the surrounding area for 14 years, and they're not slowing down. Select Plumbing and Utility handles all your plumbing needs, from faucets and water heaters to full renovations, and they can even help with your heating and cooling needs. They're also Lincoln's underground experts, repairing and replacing broken underground water and sewer lines since day one. Contact Select Plumbing and Utility today at 402-560-6197, assuring excellence in every situation, opportunity, and challenge. That's 402-560-6197.
Hop in the batter's box because it's time for the second inning of the Baseball Corner with Nick Sehnert and Austin Oerman on 93.7 The Ticket.
That's right. Time for the second inning here of the Baseball Corner. Austin Oerman and Nick Sehnert with you here Monday nights at 6 o'clock on The Ticket. Lots to get into yet for Husker baseball, including, Nick, where you just left us off with the discipline or the lack thereof. And really, what's dragged this Nebraska offense down? Through, that'd be 52 games for Nebraska. They've scored 318 runs. That's just about 6 runs per game, but it definitely doesn't feel that way for this offense. Make sure I have my numbers right. Yeah, it is 318. Nebraska is outscoring its opponents on the year, 318 to 298. But it just feels like on some nights, Nebraska's left a lot of meat on the bone with strikeouts and trying to do too much. On the other time, there's really been no meat on the bone for Nebraska. Not a lot of people have shown up. when you look at this offense, what do you think are the main reasons why the offense has struggled? Who do you think it maybe embodies the offense's struggle so far this year?
Okay, so I was looking up a couple of SEC comparisons during the break, and one is Oklahoma, who has similar. We got into the discipline, like the know what you are, know what type of hitter you are, this, that, and the other earlier. And Oklahoma, I think, does a really good job of knowing that. They don't have jump off the page type of numbers in terms of home run numbers, but this is an Oklahoma team who is 32-17 overall, the same exact conference record as the Huskers, 13-14 in the SEC. And they sit there with 56 home runs on the year, which is very similar to Nebraska. It is 2 more than the Huskers. But as a team, they are hitting 293 at the plate. And then conversely, to pair that, in the SEC, opponents are hitting basically just shy of 250, while Nebraska is hitting 273 as a team on the year, and opponents are hitting 260.
And those 20 points of batting average just on the offense are a big deal.
Yes.
And then you combine the gap of another 10 points closer, 10 points worse in pitching batting average allowed, opponents batting average, paints a pretty stark picture.
Well, and then I look at strikeout numbers. Once again, is like, so Oklahoma, not to jump back and forth so much, Oklahoma as a team has 494 hits, while Nebraska has 477. So we're not a dramatic shift. However, I look at strikeout numbers. Oklahoma as a team, 385 strikeouts on the year. Nebraska, 405.
20 more strikeouts in the same number of games, essentially.
In the same number of games. To take it a step further, and maybe this is a little more of an unfair comparison. However, in the SEC, they're not doing the greatest either. Tennessee, 15-12 in the SEC. They just got swept by Vanderbilt over the weekend. How about this? This is a team that knows who they are. 112 home runs on the year. Woo! In, what would this be? 52 games, they have 112 home runs. Their strikeout numbers, though, are high, but not as high as Oklahoma or Nebraska. Tennessee, 383 strikeouts on the year. As a team, they are hitting 305 at the plate, and their pitchers are holding opponents to a 2.21 batting average.
Holy smokes!
So
Liam Doyle, good.
Yeah, maybe that's on the far end of the spectrum, and it's a little unfair to bring Tennessee into this conversation.
But it's their record.
But it's their record, and they know who they are. And we said this about Nebraska. We said this about Florida when we saw them in person. Is you live with high strikeout numbers if it's resulting in a lot of home runs. Like if you're going to be a power type of hitting team, that's great. And you understand that, okay, strikeouts are probably going to come with that. But when you're a team like Nebraska, who we both agree is probably at their best when they manufacture runs, you need 2 things to happen. You need strikeout numbers to be down, and you need batting average to be up.
Or at least on base percentage.
Yes, or at least on base percentage.
And Nebraska's only getting on base at 370 clip.
Yes. Yeah. And I just think like the home runs will happen. I mean, Nebraska's guy that's hit the most home runs this year, Ty Stone with 8. Then you have Carey and Max Butenbach, which is crazy, with 7. Overbeek has 6. What was it? Nunez has a couple.
Frost has
6. But like we were talking about that, guys, Tennessee, not to bring them back into it. There's a dude with 20. There's another guy with 14. There's another guy with 12. There's 3 guys with 11. There's 1 guy with 10. There are 6 guys on Tennessee that individually have at least more than 3 more than Nebraska's leading home run hitter.
And again, we're not asking for Nebraska to beat Tennessee.
No, certainly not.
But we're asking Nebraska's approach to match, or at least begin to match, what Nebraska is capable of.
Yes.
Tennessee's approach matches what Tennessee's capable of.
Yes.
Nebraska needs to, now if Nebraska would want to hit 112 home runs in 52 games, sure, more power to them.
Yeah.
But that's just probably not going to happen because power is not cheap. We see this at the major league level. I'm sure we'll start to see it even more at the college level. Power isn't everything. Power's a lot. But Nick, I still think that for Nebraska to go about this approach of consistently being in the top of the Big Ten, not just fighting for a Big Ten tournament position, what's going to be most consistent for Nebraska to get to campus is gap to gap, right? I mean, you get those 1 and 2 hitters in your lineup, really good gap to gap guys, maybe 3 as well, 4 and 5, sure, maybe those guys can sell out a little bit more for power. But man, Nebraska either doesn't know what it's recruiting, or when guys get to campus, it's not translating. Either way, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I think that's the case. And I think it's important to have this conversation towards the back end of the season of, if I'm an SEC program, what do I look at? You know, if I need a hole filled, if I have a guy graduating, what's a program that I can look at and say, okay, maybe they haven't done the greatest job of developing talent, but let's get them in an SEC program and let's do it. And there's guys on this team that would be very intriguing and attractive for those programs. Devin Nunez is the first one that comes to my mind. Max Butenbach is the second one that comes to my mind. Those are 2 of Nebraska's best statistical hitters, and they've only played in 35 and 32 games. Yeah. It's unfortunate because, and I'm not trying to say that the staff has allegiances to guys, because I don't think that's necessarily how I would categorize it.
But every staff has its favorite.
Every staff has their guys that they want to lean on. But it goes back to what we talked about last Monday. At some point, you might need to have Max Butenbach in the lineup, or you might need to find a way to put Devin Nunez in the lineup, or Will Jeske even. And we saw them start to rip away from Cale Frost. But then here's the thing: is over the weekend against Michigan, when they needed a big hit, they turned to Cale Frost. And I was somewhat surprised and startled by that, because as we talked during the break off air, that's a guy who in 39 games has 39 strikeouts. He has 23 hits on the year in 39 games. He has 6 home runs, sure. But once again, 39 strikeouts in 39 games.
But what that tells me, Nick, is one of 2 things. Either, the staff has the data, and they said this is the right opportunity to use Cale Frost. His swing plane is there. He's had a track record of success against these guys, and it just didn't work out. Or the scarier option is that Nebraska's just hoping. He's due to run into one. And we need him to run into one. It's our time for him to run into one. And it feels a lot more like the hope strategy, which is not a strategy.
It's not. And that's how I felt like as we transition to the pitching staff here. That's how I feel like at some point with some of these guys that they've given opportunity after opportunity for on the bump, that you're just hoping that they're going to just magically get their stuff.
Hope it's their day.
Yeah. And that just, number one, it's a bad way to approach a baseball game. Number 2 is it's somewhat a level of stupidity to where you expected just to show up to the ballpark and just magically be there. When we talk, and Will Bolton and his staff know this, that they know that it's you got to go back to the ballpark every single day, whether you lost 1-0 the day before or whether you won 10-0. You have to show up the exact same way. We always frame baseball and softball, really, when these sports that you have series or in playoffs, right? It's that you get the opportunity the next day, right? And it goes back to what we talked about earlier. If it's a negative result one day, guess what? Glass half full. Guess what? You get to come back to the ballpark the very next day and you get to try to flush it out of your system. But then conversely and similarly, it's if you had a really good day at the ballpark on Friday, you can't show up to the ballpark on Saturday and act like you're going to be able to run through that brick wall again.
There's a new brick wall.
Yeah. And it's gotta be so monotonous, and it gets so frustrating when you fail. But man, when you're able to have consistent and sustained success, it is a blast. And the fan support will be there, and the coaches' excitement will be there, and the players' buy-in will be there. But from a big picture standpoint, going on this roller coaster ride of Will Bolton and his staff that we are on, Rob Childress is included in this. Is really Rob Childress' staff. It's this roller coaster ride that we're on, whether we want to look at the hitting and see the consistent strikeout numbers that are incredibly high, or we want to look at the pitching numbers and say, man, the ERAs just are not pretty. There's not a whole lot of guys that you look in the bullpen and say, that's a high leverage guy. There's just not a whole lot to stick on the wall. That's when you start to really have some reservations and curiosities on what the outlook is for a program like Nebraska.
And that's in the long run, in the in the future, but also in the here and now, Nick, because as we look at Nebraska still not in possession of a guaranteed Big Ten tournament berth, with the offensive struggles and inconsistency like we've noted, it needs the pitching staff to step up. But I ask you, how many pitchers deep does the circle of trust run? Because right now, Nick, I come up with, I feel good about Luke Broderick when he enters the game.
Yep.
Except that, who knows if Nebraska is going to give him a lead to work with. I feel fine with Casey Dice.
Yep.
Timmerman really answered the bell against Michigan on Friday night. Shout out Tucker Timmerman for that.
And
Gavin Blackowitz is playing his way into that circle of trust. And from there, I don't know what Nebraska is going to get from Brockett Walsh, or maybe Horn is on the fringe of that conversation. Wasn't elite on Saturday, but certainly did enough to, help Nebraska win that game. You have 4.5, maybe 5 guys that you feel good about are going to show up with good stuff, best stuff, competitive stuff, be Bulldogs on any given night. And that's barely enough to make it through a game or the first 2 games of a weekend, let alone a Big Ten tournament that Nebraska is going to have to win 5, 6, 7 games to have a chance to go to regionals.
What if, and maybe this goes back to our midweek conversation, I think we saw Tucker Timmerman in his new role. I actually think that maybe this was their way of saying, hey, this is your role going forward in 2026. Is you're going to be a starter, a weekend guy for us. I sit here and I ask myself, okay, high leverage. Where does a guy like Ryan Harrihill fit into this? Where does somebody, right? Exactly. And it goes back maybe to our midweek conversation of, did Nebraska at times just give guys opportunities just to give them opportunities? And what I mean by that is, was Nebraska purposeful? And this is me asking aloud. Was Nebraska purposeful in giving Carson Yassa as many chances as they did? Or should they have given him more? Should they have been a little more structured with his chances? Was the role that we saw Carson Yassa in the one that's best for him for this season? TJ Coates is in the similar one there. Jalen Worthley's dealing with that injury that we still don't have an outlook on. But then guys like Price Bender. And it's just, it makes you wonder. And if things would have worked out, Nebraska's 12 games above 500, then we're not having this conversation probably. But because it didn't, and because it comes off the heels of a 40-win season and a regional appearance, and Nebraska, with all things pointing to it, doesn't look like they're going to be able to make a tournament. It sits here, or you sit here and go, okay, well, who do you feel good about? I texted you over the weekend that it's pretty obvious that they feel confident in Luke Broderick, despite the home run that he gave up on Sunday. You still feel good about Luke Broderick. But Caleb Clark's an experienced guy. What about him?
Okay, but there's a difference between experienced and trusted.
Yes.
That's the problem.
And the other part of that is Nebraska, and this is where I will call the staff out a little bit, is they are trusting in the experience of Drew Christo rather than trusting the results. And like you look at, what was it, Friday night? Nebraska turns to Drew Christo
with a 3-1 lead.
With a 3-1 lead. And how does he respond? Drew, and it's so easy to make it sound like we're dogging on the guy. He gets 1 out, allows 1 run, walks a guy, and 4 batters faced.
And that run was given up by Broderick, but charged to Christo.
Yes. But then Luke Broderick comes in, and in an inning and 2/3, he walks 1 guy, strikes out 2, and 5 batters. But this is where I would say it, gets 2 ground outs.
Yeah.
It's the pitching to contact. It's knowing what you're good at, knowing what you're capable of, knowing what you do best. Nebraska's defense, for the most part, has been pretty strong this year, especially their infield. For the most part.
Generally.
Yeah. Right? Especially Brumbaugh at second. But what I'm getting at is that's the difference between, I think, what they see in a guy like Luke Broderick. And I don't know, like, I'm trying to think back to all of Christo's appearances, Austin. You'll probably be able to help me out because you just have a sharper memory than I do. Of like, have they put him in situations to where they ask him to do too much?
The thing that I think about when I think about Drew Christo is in his 26 appearances, Nick, Drew Christo has appeared in half of Nebraska's games. Is he's been put in any situation? There isn't a role for Drew Christo?
Yeah.
And I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because the staff trusts him so much that they said, okay, Drew, you can go out, you can handle this.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's they're still figuring out what to do with Drew Christo because he still doesn't know who he is as a pitcher. Because, Nick, have we seen steps forward from Drew Christo as a freshman to a senior? Maybe a notch or two to his fastball, but it's still hittable.
Maybe.
His slider, not anything to write home about, right? It's not his signature pitch. This is a guy that's, 6'4", well-built young man, right? We talked about the brick wall.
Yes.
Drew Christo's probably the one you want running through it. And Evan Bland, bring him up again, did a really interesting profile on Drew Christo in the Omaha World Herald. I highly recommend you go read it. Drew Christo would run through that brick wall for Nebraska.
100%.
Just like his dad, Monty, would have back in the day for Nebraska football. And on the one hand, you need some of that. You need a guy who's willing to do whatever it takes for the team. But there's an interesting line in Evan's piece about Drew Christo where Drew Christo says, yeah, I'm overanalyzing. I have been. I overanalyzed when I got here. I wasn't just trusting my stuff. Nick, it reads to me like Drew Christo is a guy who came in with all this pomp, this circumstance, this acclaim out of the Nebraska prep ranks, and either didn't develop or couldn't develop. Maybe Drew Christo was a finished product in high school because we haven't seen that big step forward. He hasn't locked down a role. He hasn't developed that signature pitch, right? The fastball that was 94 in high school is still about there in college. And to your point from the first segment of the show, 94 is much closer to normal now than it was even when Drew Christo was entering college. There's not that consistent second offering for him. And whatever it is, it's inherently hittable. Whatever it is he's throwing, the command, the control are only so-so. Because you think about a guy, Nick, like Cam Wynn. If Drew Christo would have developed into Cam Wynn, that would have been, no pun intended, a huge win for Nebraska. Even Jake Buns, right? Those are guys that threw hard, that found a secondary pitch, that carved out a role in late innings. Drew Christo hasn't done that. You think about a guy like Colby Gomes. Who would you rather have?
Oh, yeah.
Colby Gomes or Drew Christo?
Yeah.
Right? Christo will at least take the ball. I don't think Christo's a head case. Or I think Colby Gomes, definitely struggled with some of the mental aspects of being a Division I baseball player at Nebraska at times.
And ever since Trevor Boone.
Yeah, right, exactly. That one fateful night in Bricktown.
Yeah.
That's what it goes back to. So you appreciate Drew Christo's mentality and mindset, the fact he's willing to take the ball.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, you wish the results were better for him. You need them to be better for Nebraska. And you just wonder what happened or didn't happen in the developmental process that we're still here with Drew Christo. Which then brings me to my final point, and I'll stop monologizing here.
That's all right.
Is Drew Christo running out to the mound every other game for Nebraska because the staff believes that he is legitimately one of their best options and they're hoping that they finally see the Drew Christo they believe in? Or does Drew Christo keep taking the ball and running out to the mound because Nebraska has no one else? So hope is the only strategy they have because they'd rather roll the dice with Drew Christo than anyone else.
That it's fascinating because as I'm reminiscing on Drew Christo's career, which by the way, I think he could come back next year. Is that correct?
I don't know. I think the staff would want him back. I don't know if the fan base would.
Here's so it was in 2022, 22. No, I think it is all 4 years. Excuse me. He's done. He was ranked the 44th best player in the entire country coming out of high school.
MLB draft consideration.
Yes. Now, here's where I would say it's been interesting. The role conversation, I think, is very accurate because he started twice in 2022. He started once in 2023, but then last year started 10 times.
Mm-hmm.
And then now is just not that guy.
Well, not like the starting results were great.
No,
That's a guy whose stuff should play up in the back of a bullpen.
Sure.
Where he has the physique and the build of a guy, Nick, that you look to as this is an intimidating first off the bus.
Yep.
Let's make him our Friday, Saturday, or even Sunday guy. But the results weren't there. The stuff
They
didn't
weren't.
play up. He couldn't pace himself, couldn't command control consistently. Okay, you give everyone a shot as a starter. It didn't work out. You move to the bullpen. Stuff is supposed to play up in the bullpen. It hasn't for Drew Christo. Plain and simple. Like, his stuff hasn't gained that extra, mile an hour or two when he can cut it loose for an inning. He's not even the bridge guy that you can point to. Hey, Drew, we need length. Go out there and wear this one for us. Thanks for your efforts. There's no role. It's so nebulous for him.
And which is unfair. It's unfortunate because it's kind of a harsh criticism or, potential criticism on the staff for us to sit here and say, hey, are they just throwing him the ball because he's not, I don't want to call him the sacrificial lamb, but you just kind of hope, there's that word again. Mm-hmm. You hope that he just eats innings.
Because they like him because he's a good guy.
And they know he'll do it for Nebraska. Like, that's a pretty hefty speculation to make. But also, then that plays a part into somebody else on that staff should want that opportunity. Not to be the sacrificial lamb, but they should want to have the ball and have the ball given to them in some of the most crucial times of the year. I think back to last year when Nebraska, it was during the rain delay against Florida in the last game of the year, which ended up being the last game of the year.
Yeah.
And Christo was the first one that they called on out of the rain delay.
Mm-hmm.
And he was fine. I think he let up a run or two in that game. But then they turned to, I think it was KP they turned to.
Yeah.
And that did not go well.
And he got cagged.
Yeah. But I sit there and I'm like, okay, so this is now, like, as we sit here, he was one of the guys that they viewed as high leverage, which I think last year, I can't remember who started on the mound for them in that final game against Florida.
I'm going to pull it up right now. Let me help you out with that. So Nebraska last year, they started, it was Brockett that got the ball.
And Brockett was fine.
He gave up 7 in an inning in a third.
So, didn't Nebraska answer? Because it was like a competitive game at the rain delay.
It was, because Nebraska got a couple off of Pierce Coppola.
That's right.
It was not Christo that Nebraska went to, Nick. Kyle Freilich came on. He went 2 2/3. Then the rain delay hit.
That's right.
Kyle Freilich was rolling. They went to Casey Dice.
That's who was rolling.
Then they went to Casey Dice, who ended up giving up 4 runs.
Yes.
Then it was Evan Borst, Kyle Perry, and then Ty Horn came in with a 2 strikeout shutdown inning, but a little bit too little, too late.
Yeah, so I just think, okay, so scratch everything I just said there. But no, I think when you look at Christo, I hate using the reference sacrificial lamb, but that's what it kind of feels like. Is like, you know what, this is kind of the role that we've given him, is that, hey, we just need you to go out there and either eat up innings, maybe you get into a little bit of a groove. But not only from this scope of the season, you look back and say, man, what could have been with Drew Christo? I think you look back at his career.
Yeah.
And you go, man, what could have been from the guy from Elkhorn High School?
Let's go ahead and stick a pin right there. We'll come back for the third inning, wrap up this discussion, take a quick look at the final weekend series of the year for Nebraska. What will it take for the Huskers to qualify for the Big Ten tournament? We'll wrap up the show in the third inning with that.
You're listening to the Baseball Corner with Nick Sehnert and Austin Oerman on 93.7 The Ticket. It's time for the second inning stretch. Get out of your seat, stretch, and get ready for the third inning.
Unearth the secret to long-lasting tires at Treads Central Tire Pros, a league